I'm going to tell you a truth nobody wants to say out loud. There are places that don't just deny you a seat. They deny you dignity. And before someone comes in with the preloaded speech, it's policy, it's for safety, it's procedure, you need to understand one thing: rules without humanity become a weapon. And some people use that weapon with pleasure, especially when the target is a fat woman. I'm not here to tell you a story about dieting. I'm not here to sell you some glow-up narrative where I transform myself to earn basic respect. I'm going to tell you about the day I was treated like a public problem in a packed airport, and how that became the biggest mistake of the person who thought I'd take it quietly. So listen closely, because this changes the way you see what's normal, what's procedure, and what people call being polite. I didn't shrink. I didn't apologize. I didn't ask for permission. I documented it. I spoke up. And I turned humiliation into a national conversation. Before I share my story, I want to ask you something simple. If honest stories about injustice, courage, and turning the tables speak to your heart, drop a comment and hit the like button. That way I'll know this kind of content resonates with you, and I can bring even more stories that feel like a hug on your journey. Her name is Camila. She's 28. And she's always known that being fat means walking around under a spotlight you never asked for. You walk into a room and it feels like people think your body is public property, like you signed some contract giving them permission to have an opinion. Camila works, pays her bills, helps her mom, lives her life. But there's a cruel difference between living and feeling like you're allowed to exist. And for years she tried to earn that permission the hard way. Darker clothes, smaller posture, a softer smile. The kind of strategy fat women learn early. If I'm flawless, maybe they'll treat me like a person. The week this story happened, she had a rare reason to feel happy without guilt. A trip. Not luxury. Not showing off, just a breath of air. A work conference out of state, the first time in a long time she'd be flying alone, with no one beside her saying, "Bring a jacket to hide it," or "Try not to eat at the airport." She bought the ticket in advance, picked her seat, paid everything properly, checked in on time. And still, while she was packing, an old voice started poking at the back of her mind. What if I don't fit? Notice how twisted that is. Thin people don't pack their bags wondering if they'll fit into a basic ride they already paid for. But Camila did. Because she'd seen the looks, heard the whispers, lived that feeling of being a problem just for showing up. And even so she went. Not because she felt confident, because she was tired of letting fear make decisions for her. At the airport she did everything right. She arrived early. ID in hand. Line. Security. That everyday chaos everyone deals with. But for her there was an extra layer. The way some stairs lasted too long. Like they were measuring. Calculating. Bracing for something. She sat near the gate and felt the anxiety rise slowly, like a broken elevator. No warning, no control. She tried to breathe, scroll on her phone, pretend everything was normal. And that's when the first thing happened. Small enough that some people would call it paranoia. But big enough that anyone who's lived this would recognize it instantly. A woman looked at Camila and said to her partner, loud enough to be perfectly heard, "Hope she doesn't sit next to us." Camila heard it. She acted like she didn't. Because that's the social training. Swallow the humiliation so you don't get labeled too sensitive or overreacting. A few minutes later, a guy walked by, glanced at the chair she was sitting in, and let out a quick little laugh, like he thought he was being subtle. And Camila felt that old shame trying to crawl back inside her, like shame is private property reserved for fat bodies. But this time something was different. Camila wasn't in "please don't notice me" mode anymore. She was in "I paid and I exist" mode. And without even realizing it, she was about to collide with the kind of authority that mistakes a uniform for permission to humiliate. Because when boarding was called, what was waiting for her wasn't "have a great flight." It was an organic kind of humiliation, carefully designed to hurt. When boarding was called, Camila stood up with that automatic care of someone who learned early not to get in the way of the world. She checked her boarding pass, held her backpack close to her body, and got in line like everyone else. Just with that extra tension nobody sees, but that weighs more than any suitcase. At first, everything felt normal. The beep at the gate, the narrow jet bridge, people squeezing past each other, that familiar airplane smell mixed with pure hurry. And then came the first sting. An airline employee, major carrier, crisp uniform, a smile that didn't reach her eyes, looked Camila up and down and didn't say, "Good afternoon." Instead, in the tone of someone fixing a logistical issue, she said, "Ma'am, one moment. Step over here, please." Camila stopped off to the side of the boarding lane, and the line kept flowing around her like she was a traffic cone. A couple behind her whispered. A man up ahead glanced back and then looked away, like making eye contact would mean admitting he was watching something ugly happen. The employee didn't lower her voice. She didn't even try to protect Camila's privacy. And that detail matters because a seatbelt extender is a safety item, and it should be handled discreetly. "You're going to need a seatbelt extender, okay?" she said loudly, like she was announcing the wrong gate. Camila felt her face burn. Not because an extender exists, but because someone decided to turn it into a show. And before Camila could answer, the employee kept going, scanning her from head to toe and then looking at the crowded walkway. "And you might not fit, so we're going to check your seat." The word "fit" hung in the air, and with it, the unspoken permission for everyone else to measure Camila with their eyes too. She tried to breathe and respond calmly because she was still running on that old survival reflex of being polite just to make it through. "I paid for my seat. I just want to board." The employee gave that half smile, cold, practiced, and delivered the line that changes everything. "Ma'am, it's procedure. If the armrest can't go all the way down and you're encroaching on the other passenger's space, you'll have to get off the flight. You'll have to get off the flight." Just like that. Simple, flat, like she was talking about an oversized bag, not a person. Camila heard it, and for a split second her body snapped back to childhood. That feeling of being the mistake, the inconvenience, the reason everyone else is uncomfortable. But this time there was something new in her pocket. Her phone. She didn't point the camera yet, but she wrapped her hand around it like someone gripping a fire extinguisher next to an open flame. Because Camila already knew something most people learn way too late. When someone humiliates you in public under the excuse of procedure, your silence becomes permission. The employee called over another coworker and said, "Still way too loud. Bring an extender and see if there's a seat with more space because this is complicated." "This is complicated" wasn't about the airplane. It was about Camila's body being treated like an operational defect. And then came the final hit. A man in the boarding line, impatient, laughed out loud and said, "Oh great, here we go. She's gonna delay everyone." Camila turned toward him slowly. And for the first time, instead of swallowing it, she chose to send it back, steady and firm. "I'm not a delay. I'm a customer. I paid. And I'm not going to be humiliated so you can have a peaceful flight." In that moment, she wasn't trying to fit into the world anymore. She was deciding the world was going to learn how to deal with her existence. Without a spectacle, without a sentence, without cruelty disguised as policy. And that's when, while the entire jet bridge watched, Camila finally turned the camera on. Camila stepped onto the plane with the camera already recording, but pointed at the floor. Not because she was looking for a fight, but because she knows how this game works. If she films, she's making a scene. If she doesn't, she's overreacting. Without proof, humiliation turns into rumor. The aisle was tight, people standing, elbows bumping, bags blocking the way. And still, somehow, it felt like her body was the only problem. She reached her row, found her seat number, and there was that 1 second of silence where it felt like the whole world held its breath, waiting to see if she'd fit. The gate agent showed up behind her, now with a flight attendant, like Camila was an incident, not a passenger. The flight attendant, sweet voice, trained firmness, spoke loud enough for the whole row to hear. "Ma'am, before you sit down, we need to verify that the seatbelt fastens and that the armrest goes all the way down." It wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. It was the inspection tone. The stage they set. Two people standing there watching while Camila tried to do something as private as settling her own body into a seat. Camila sat. The seat swallowed her tension along with the air around her. She adjusted her bag, pulled the belt, and the metal made that click that should have been normal. But in that moment it sounded like evidence. The belt didn't fasten. Her heart kicked hard, not from surprise but from anticipation. She'd imagined this. She'd feared it since she packed her bag. The difference was, now her fear had an audience. The flight attendant extended the seatbelt extender and said, "Here, just use this." Like tossing a napkin over a stain. Camila took it. Her hands shook, but she forced herself to breathe slowly. She clicked the extender in place. The buckle finally locked. But the flight attendant didn't leave. He stayed there watching. Waiting for the next test. "Now the armrest," she said, pointing. Camila tried to lower the armrest on the aisle side. Stopped halfway, stiff, stubborn, like it refused. She tried again, carefully, without using too much force so nobody could label her aggressive. It stuck. And that's when the theater got a narrator. A woman in the row ahead craned her neck and commented, like Camila wasn't even there, "Guys, that's dangerous, right?" A man across the aisle let out an impatient, annoyed sound. Camila's stomach dropped. This wasn't about comfort anymore. She was being judged like a threat. The flight attendant took a deep breath, glanced at her coworker and said, at a volume that was impossible to call discreet, "If the armrest can't go all the way down, you can't travel in this seat. It's a safety issue, and you can't take up the space of the passenger next to you." Camila looked up. The passenger next to her, a thin guy with headphones resting around his neck, pulled one ear free and said like he was doing her a favor, "Ma'am, I just don't want to be squeezed in. I paid too." It cut through Camila like a blade because it was true, and at the same time it was a trap, turning a structural problem, tiny seats, service designed around acceptable bodies, into individual blame. Then the flight attendant delivered the verdict with the same bureaucratic calm someone uses to read out a landing time. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to step off the aircraft so we can handle this outside." The words sounded polite, but the meaning was raw. Get off. Disappear. Don't mess up boarding. Camila felt her throat tighten. And for a second she almost gave in, almost stood up, almost apologized, almost made herself small again. But then she remembered the jet bridge. The "you're going to delay everyone." The way they said, "This is complicated." And she did something that changed the air in the cabin. She lifted her phone, now pointed forward, and said clear and steady without yelling, "My name is Camila. I'm on a plane with a major airline. I paid for this ticket. I have the right to travel with respect. And I'm being publicly humiliated because of my body." Silence. Even the crying baby sounded quieter. The flight attendant took a step toward her, voice sharper. "Ma'am, you can't film the crew." Camila didn't lower her phone. "I'm not filming for fun. I'm filming because I want you to handle this with dignity. If this is procedure, then do it the right way, without exposing me, without humiliating me, without turning me into a spectacle." And that's when the worst humiliation became the turning point. Not because things suddenly got easy, but because for the first time, Camila took the story out of their hands. The camera was on, and the whole cabin shifted into that strange nobody move energy. Like any tiny gesture could make everything worse. Camila kept her hands steady, but her voice stayed controlled. No yelling. Because she knew that, to a lot of people, a fat woman only has to raise her tone a fraction before she gets labeled a threat. The flight attendant repeated it, harsher this time. "Ma'am, you can't film the crew." Camila didn't argue. She just drove the sentence in like a nail. "Then you document what's happening and give it to me in writing, because I'm not walking away without proof of this humiliation." The flight attendant motioned with her hand and called someone on the intercom. The message was short, cold, routine. "Purser to row X. 2 minutes later, the lead flight attendant showed up. The posture of someone walking in to put out a fire without getting any smoke on their uniform. He looked at the phone first, then at the armrest, then at Camila. He didn't ask how she was doing, he asked what she was doing. "Ma'am, turn the recording off now," he said in that tone that sounds polite, but already comes with a threat underneath. Camila didn't lower the phone. She took a breath and spoke slowly, loud enough for everyone to hear. Because the moment they turned her into a public announcement, the problem became public. "I've been buying plane tickets for years and I've never had to become a spectacle. Today you exposed me and now you want me to have no record of it." The purser tried to frame it as discipline. "If you don't comply, we can have you removed from the flight." That word, removed, landed again with the full package. Shame, authority, and the message that her body was something that could be expelled. Someone a few rows back snapped, annoyed, "Turn that off," like the issue was the video, not the humiliation happening in real time. Another person muttered, "This is going to delay us," and Camila saw it clearly. The crowd always tries to punish the victim for causing trouble, never the people who created the scene. Then the purser made the classic move. He softened his voice and tried to sound reasonable without offering a real solution. "We're going to handle this the best way possible, we just need you to cooperate," he said, as if cooperate meant be quiet. Camila gave her first condition. Clear, adult, non-negotiable. "Cooperating isn't staying silent. I'll cooperate when you stop talking about my body out loud and treat me with privacy." He tried to cut her off, "But it's a safety issue." Camila answered with precision, refusing the trap of debating her body like it was evidence. "Safety doesn't require humiliation. Safety requires procedure with dignity, and you chose to make it a spectacle." It was the first time the purser looked like he realized he wasn't dealing with an embarrassed passenger anymore. He was dealing with a woman who wasn't going to be pushed into the corner again. Then Camila set her second condition, aimed straight at what was really happening. "If there's an adjustment to be made, that's on you to solve, not by kicking me off like I'm a defect." The purser's jaw tightened. He glanced around, then motioned for the flight attendant to step back, trying to shrink the audience. Too late. Half the cabin had already seen it, heard it, understood it. And that's when he said the sentence that opened the next door. "Let's talk up front, out of view." Camila stood, but before she took a step she said, loud enough to be captured on audio and in the cabin's collective memory, "Out of view is fine. Off the record is not." Up at the front of the plane, near that little curtain that separates who's allowed from who isn't, the purser tried to turn humiliation into an administrative conversation. He positioned his body in a way that hid Camila from most passengers, but still left her exposed enough to feel like she was being escorted. The flight attendant stood off to the side, arms crossed, with the look of someone who'd already decided what the official story would be. "We're going to resolve this," he said, and it sounded like polite blackmail. "I just need you to understand there are rules and the crew needs to be able to work without being filmed." Camila kept the camera low, not framing anyone's face, and answered in a firm tone. "I understand rules. I don't accept humiliation." He tried to shove the blame back into her lap. "You knew you might need an extender, right?" Camila didn't take the bait. "I knew I might need a safety item. I didn't know you were going to announce it like it was a moral failure." The flight attendant jumped in with that final, dismissive tone people use when they want to shut down someone else's dignity. "You're creating a problem that doesn't exist." Camila looked her dead in the eye and fired back without shaking. "The problem exists from the moment you said, 'You might not fit,' in front of everyone." The purser sighed like she was being difficult and offered a solution that sounded technical but came loaded with punishment. "We can reseat you, or you can get off and rebook at no charge." The words "get off" tasted like expulsion. And "at no charge" sounded like she was supposed to be grateful they weren't billing her for the humiliation. Camila asked the one question that cuts through theater like a blade. "Reseat me where?" He answered, There's a seat in the back middle between two passengers. In other words, take her out of the seat she paid for and dump her somewhere worse, like it was a workaround and not a demotion. And then came the dirtiest offer. The one they almost never say out loud, but that so many fat people have heard in different versions. In some cases, the airline recommends purchasing an extra seat for additional comfort. He said it like advice. But the message was clear. Pay twice to be treated like a human once. Camila went quiet for 2 seconds. Not because she didn't have an answer, but because she was choosing how to speak without exploding. And then she said with surgical calm, "I'm not going to pay twice to exist. I'm not going to accept being shoved to the back as punishment. And I'm not turning off my record while you try to push me into a solution that humiliates me." The purser's face hardened. "So you're refusing to cooperate?" Camila answered with the sentence that flips the whole table. "No. I'm demanding proper treatment." And then for the first time she laid out 3 clear demands. Not as requests. As boundaries. "I want a solution that doesn't expose me or degrade me. A real receipt with privacy and respect. I want a formal record of what happened, who approached me and the stated reason for the humiliation. And I want you to stop treating my body like public business. Safety items should be offered discreetly." The purser looked around, clocked the phone, and realized the story had already gotten too big to smother. And that's when he tried a different tactic. The most dangerous one. He hinted at calling airport security and painting her as a problem passenger. Camila didn't flinch. She only said, "Go ahead. Call them. Just know I have video, and I'm taking this all the way." Right there in that cramped galley, Camila understood the truth. This was never just about a seat. It was about who gets to decide whether she's a person or an inconvenience. The purser froze for a second, like he was calculating which threat would work best without leaving fingerprints. He leaned in and said quietly, but not quiet enough, "You know this can become a police matter, right?" And that word, police, wasn't about safety. It was about fear. About control. About trying to shove Camila back into her old place. Obey quietly. Camila felt her whole body react, but not like before. It wasn't panic. It was clarity. She answered without raising her voice. "If you call security, I'll explain exactly what happened and I'll request a written report. And I'm also going to document that you tried to intimidate me into stopping the recording." The flight attendant let out a short, disbelieving laugh, like it was absurd for a passenger to demand formality and respect. "You're overreacting," she said. And it was almost funny, because overreacting is the favorite word of people who humiliate you and still want to walk away clean. Camila shot back in the same tone with a sentence that slammed the door shut. "Overreacting is talking about my body out loud on a packed plane." The purser tried to regain control. "So you're going to keep recording?" Camila tilted the phone so it pointed more toward the floor and said, "I'm going to keep documenting the situation. I don't need to film anyone's face to prove what's being done to me." That detail rattled him because it removed the easy crew privacy argument as a smokescreen. This wasn't about the camera anymore. It was about conduct. He stepped away for a moment, speaking into his radio, and Camila was left standing there in the corner, like she'd been put in timeout in front of a plane full of strangers. Except now the punishment wasn't silent. 2 people in the first row were watching with that unmistakable look of "this is wrong." And an older woman walked past and whispered, "Stay strong." It wasn't much, but it was human. And Camila felt how a tiny gesture can be a life jacket when everything else is trying to drown you. When the purser came back, his tone had changed, not exactly kind but more careful. He spoke like someone making a concession without admitting fault. "We're going to reseat you somewhere that avoids discomfort with other passengers." Camila didn't accept the pretty phrasing. She asked again, flat and direct. "Where?" He pointed to a row where, by pure operational luck, there was an empty seat next to it. One of those coincidences the airline sells as a solution, But that only exists when there's leftover space. You'll sit there. That's it, he added, trying to end it. Camila took a breath and set one more condition. Simple, firm, non-negotiable. I'll move. But first I want your name and the flight number. And I want the official channel to file a complaint, right now. His face tightened, clearly annoyed that he was being forced to own what had happened. But he gave his name. Camila repeated it out loud so her phone could capture it, then said, "Thank you. This is a record." The flight attendant started to speak, but the purser cut her off with a gesture. Not out of respect for Camila, but because he suddenly understood the risk. Every extra word could become evidence. And in that microsecond, Camila learned the real rule of the world. When there's a record, humiliation loses its nerve. She walked back down the aisle, now with space to move but with her chest still heavy. The man who'd complained about the delay looked away. The guy who would have been her seatmate in the original setup stared down at his lap, pretending none of it had happened. Camila wasn't looking for revenge. She was looking for stability. She sat in the new seat and before putting her phone away she said one more line, not for the crew but for herself and for anyone listening. "I'm not asking for privilege. I'm demanding respect." And as the plane started to taxi, the thought that changes the whole story hit her. This happened to her. Ticket paid, polite, calm. How many people had this happen to them, and swallowed it alone? Camila looked down at her screen. The video was there. Still alive. And she knew it. This wasn't going to die inside that cabin. Camila didn't post until she was off the plane. Not because she wanted to go viral, but because she knew that inside that aircraft, any reaction she had could be used against her. An excuse to label her an unruly passenger. Outside, with her heart still racing and her hands still shaking, she sat on an airport bench and watched the entire video once. Like someone replaying a car crash just to make sure it really happened. She was careful. She trimmed the parts where faces were clearly visible and kept the focus on the audio. The tone, the words, the context. Then she wrote a simple caption without asking permission to exist. "Today I was publicly embarrassed on a flight because of my body. This isn't about comfort, it's about dignity. Procedure without discretion is humiliation." Within minutes, the thing that always happens when a truth millions of people live suddenly has proof started happening. Me too. Women in the comments saying they'd been made to get off the plane crying. Men admitting they'd paid extra just to avoid being shamed. People describing the way an extender gets handed over like a public punishment. The video didn't blow up because it was controversial. It blew up because it was familiar to an outrageous number of people. And then came the two predictable sides. On one side, a wave of support. Followers tagging friends, pages reposting it, people saying, "Thank you for not swallowing it." On the other side, the usual package, promoting obesity, just lose weight, they want special treatment, buy 2 seats and move on. Camila read that and felt the cruelty hidden inside the phrase "move on." Like paying twice is a normal solution, like financial punishment is just part of existing in a fat body. The airline responded in the cleanest, coldest way possible. A generic statement, no names, no real apology, just commitment to customer experience and safety procedures. And then came the most calculated move of all. A polite DM, perfectly worded, asking her to remove the content and handle it internally. It was an attempt to turn humiliation into a silent agreement. And in that moment, Camila knew, being silenced would mean repeating the violence, just with corporate makeup. Camila answered with the kind of maturity that comes from realizing the problem wasn't a poorly trained employee. It was a system that feels perfectly comfortable humiliating specific bodies. She refused to delete anything. And she posted a second video that hit even harder because it wasn't a rant. It was direction. If the company wants to handle it internally, great. Here's what I want. A discreet approach protocol, crew training so passengers aren't exposed, and a clear channel for support without humiliation. And I want it public, because what happened to me isn't an isolated case. The backlash jumped outside her usual audience. A local news outlet asked for an interview. Bigger creators reacted. Travel pages and consumer rights accounts weighed in. And with that came the part that hurts the most. People who never treated her well started showing up like they'd been on her side all along. But Camila wasn't chasing approval anymore. She was building a line in the sand. What started as humiliation inside a cabin turned into a public conversation about respect, privacy, and how the word procedure can be used as permission to dehumanize. And at that point, the story stopped being a viral video. It became a choice. Either she accepted the attempt to bury it with a private conversation and a compensation coupon, or she turned it into an issue, with names, with rules, with consequences. 2 days later, the airline came back with the offer a lot of companies use, like a premium eraser. A generic apology and a little gesture, hoping you'll trade justice for silence. The message was polished. Pretty words, zero real accountability. We regret your experience. We want to hear you. We can offer you a voucher. A voucher. Like humiliation has a price list. Like respect is a coupon. Camila read it 3 times. Not because she was unsure, but because it hurt to realize how much the system counts on exhaustion. They bet the victim will get tired, will want peace, will accept crumbs just to stop reliving it. And at the same time, the haters were doing the dirty work for free. Comments calling her playing the victim, clout chasing, delaying the flight, a safety risk. But the cruelest part wasn't even the open hate. It was the hate disguised as practical advice. Buy 2 seats and move on. As if the world can charge a toll for certain bodies and call that normal. Camila realized that if she took the voucher and shut up, the message would be simple. If you tolerate humiliation, you get a discount. If you demand respect, you get punished. So she made the decision that turns an isolated incident into a movement. She wasn't going to negotiate her dignity in private. She replied in 3 dry lines. Thank you for reaching out. I don't accept any agreement conditioned on silence. I want a public response with concrete measures. And she posted a story saying exactly that, because transparency is also protection. That same night, Camila opened a question box asking for stories. If you've ever been humiliated on a plane because of your body, tell me. Don't use names if you don't want to. Within hours, it became an avalanche. People saying they were forced to get off the plane. People saying the crew announced the extender out loud. People admitting they bought an extra seat out of fear, not comfort. She read it all and understood something that made her sick. What happened to her had a method. It wasn't one rude employee. It was a pattern, enabled by the lack of clear protocol, by a culture of public shaming, and by the habit of treating certain bodies like an administrative inconvenience. And then came her first concrete move. Camila wrote an open letter, short, direct, impossible to twist, with 4 public demands. A discreet approach for safety items like seatbelt extenders, with no announcements and no public exposure. Crew training that bans humiliating language. You don't fit, this is complicated. A complaint channel that creates a formal record of the incident, with a clear response deadline. A public commitment that procedure will not be used as an excuse for humiliation. She posted it and pinned it to her profile. And she did more. She created a simple form to collect reports, date, route, type of humiliation, and said she would submit everything together as a formal complaint. This wasn't revenge. It was documentation. The kind of thing companies hate because they can't dismiss it as drama. The airline tried one last move. They suggested a private meeting to align with her and a representative. Camila replied, "A meeting is fine. But I want minutes. I want written commitments. And I want the outcome public." And that's when she understood the real turning point. When a fat person stops negotiating their right to exist and starts demanding policy, the game changes. Because the system can handle individual shame. But it short-circuits when it runs into organization. The meeting happened over a video call with 3 people on the other side. Someone from customer care, someone from legal, and someone who introduced themselves as passenger experience. Nobody started by asking how Camila was doing. They started by asking about the video. Camila, we understand your frustration, but your post has created negative interpretations about the airline. They said, like the problem was public image, not public humiliation. Camila answered with one simple line. Negative interpretation doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes from behavior. And then came the first gaslighting move, the classic one. Maybe you misunderstood the tone because this is a safety procedure. Camila didn't let it turn into a debate about feelings. She pulled it back to the facts. In my video, your employee says, you might not fit. That isn't procedure. That's humiliating language. On the other side, a half-second of silence. The kind of silence where someone is searching for a sentence that can erase audio that already exists. Then legal stepped in with the second attempt. You understand that recording crew members may violate internal rules and affect flight safety. Camila answered without aggression but without backing down. I recorded because I was exposed. If you had handled it discreetly, there wouldn't be a video. And then she added what became the moral center of the entire conversation. I didn't film for attention. I filmed for protection. They tried to negotiate again. A bigger voucher, miles, a future upgrade, always with the word closure hovering around the offer. Camila cut it off. I don't want compensation for me. I want a protocol change so nobody has to go through this. That sentence blew up their plan because it removed their favorite option, pay it off, and forced the company to face something that requires real work. The passenger experience person tried a third path. We can train the team, they said, vague, safe, empty. Camila answered. Training without a public commitment becomes a hallway promise. I want a document, a deadline, and clear guidelines for discreet handling, including extenders. And then she said what nobody on the other side wanted to hear. If you don't take responsibility publicly, I'm sending the video and the report dossier to the press and to consumer protection agencies. The call went tense. Legal shifted their tone. That could have consequences. Camila replied. Consequences are the minimum. I already got mine inside that plane. And that's when public pressure hit like an avalanche. That same day, a news site published a piece with the video, edited, no faces, and excerpts from the open letter. Bigger accounts amplified it, and the conversation stopped being Camila's case, and turned into a broader debate about treatment, privacy, and the dignity of fat passengers. The airline realized they weren't dealing with a post anymore. They were dealing with reputation. And reputation is the language corporations understand fastest. 2 hours later, something changed. They asked for a second conversation, to align an institutional response. This time they didn't lead with a voucher. They led with protocol review. Camila didn't celebrate. She didn't trust it, because public statements without concrete change are just corporate makeup. And she made that clear. An institutional response without specific measures is just pretty text. In that moment, the climax was complete. The company tried to silence her, tried to soften it, tried to buy it, tried to hide behind procedure, tried to intimidate her with internal recording rules. And Camila answered with what scares any unjust system the most. A record, clear demands, and the willingness to go all the way. The public statement came out the next day, packed with the kind of vocabulary companies use when they want to sound human without committing too much. We regret, we value, we're investigating, we'll reinforce training. But this time there was one different detail, and it only happened because the story had gotten too big to disappear. They mentioned improvements in handling seating situations and safety items, and promised to review their approach guidelines. It still wasn't what Camila wanted, but it was the first crack in the wall of, that never happens. The internet reacted the way it always does, half saying, congrats, this is a win, half saying, so dramatic, and a third group, the most dangerous one, trying to use the situation to attack Camila herself. People made memes of her body. People commented that she shouldn't travel anymore. The kind of cruelty that only exists when the target is seen as less human. And at the same time, private messages came in, the ones nobody posts but the ones that are the truest. I cried because I thought it was only me. But here's the part no viral video shows. When the adrenaline wears off, all that's left is your body. Camila started having flashbacks to the narrow aisle, the armrest getting stuck, the purser saying removed, the cabin staring at her like she was a risk. At night, she replayed every sentence in her head, trying to find where she messed up, like her mind was still trained to blame her for existing. One day she opened the flight app to buy another ticket and felt her hands start sweating. It wasn't fear of flying. It was fear of humiliation. And that made Camila angry because that's when she understood the real size of the damage. It wasn't just public embarrassment. It was an attempt to shrink her life. She almost did what a lot of people do just to survive. Disappear for a while. Stop talking. Go back to the kind of silence that's comfortable for everyone else. But then she remembered the form, the stories, the Me Too in 100 different versions. And she realized her silence would become one more brick in someone else's prison. So she made a decision that doesn't look heroic on camera, but is brutal to sustain. She was going to turn this into ongoing work. Not performative activism. Not a witch hunt. Method. Camila announced 3 things clearly. A permanent highlight on her profile with guidance. How to request an extender discreetly, how to file a complaint, how to demand a written report of what happened. An anonymous compilation of stories by category, public exposure, threat of removal, pressure to buy an extra seat, to prove the pattern. Public pressure for a clear, dignified protocol. Because procedure can't be an excuse to humiliate. And she left one sentence that became the backbone of this whole story. I don't want to be treated like an exception. I want people to stop treating fat people like a problem. There was no pretty reconciliation. No perfect, satisfying apology. There was a system backing up one step because it had to, and a woman who decided she wasn't going to pay the price of silence. Today Camila still travels. Not because she's fearless now, but because she decided her life wasn't going to be shrunk by other people's outsourced shame. And she learned a hard truth. Courage isn't the absence of triggers. It's continuing even when your body remembers. The airline didn't suddenly turn into the good guy. What happened was more realistic. After public pressure, the tone changed and the company started responding more carefully when the issue was public exposure and how passengers are approached. Because now there was a record and there was accountability. It doesn't erase what she lived through, but it creates the bare minimum consequence systems avoid whenever they can. Camila changed on the inside too. Before, she walked into places trying to be perfect to earn respect. After that flight, she understood that perfection doesn't protect anyone from being targeted when prejudice already decided the storyline. So she changed strategies. Instead of asking for permission, she started demanding protocol, documentation, and dignified treatment, without emotional bargaining. And there's something she repeats because it's the heart of this story. Forgiving isn't erasing. Moving on isn't staying silent. And procedure isn't a free pass to dehumanize. What was supposed to be just a trip became a personal and collective turning point. Camila turned humiliation into a public issue because she understood something simple. When one fat person speaks alone, they call it drama. When many speak with proof, they call it reality. So let me ask you something. How much longer are you going to accept being treated like an inconvenience in places you paid to be? How much longer are you going to believe respect is a favor, not a right? If this story hit you, comment, "I will not shrink," and hit the like button, because that tells me you want more real stories with no sugarcoating the way life actually is. And if you've been through something similar, at an airport, on a bus, at a doctor's office, at work, with family, share it in the comments, only in the way that feels safe for you. The next stories on real bodies, surreal battles will keep doing what a lot of people hate. Shining a light exactly where they always told us to hide. See you in the next story.